योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचाम् मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहुपुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिं गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुर्गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः हरिः ओम्. So in the previous session, we looked at Sutra 3.29, which also covered the 13th of the Sanyamas and the Siddhis mentioned in the Vibhuti-pāda. And that was Nabhichakre Kaya Vyuha Jnanam. Today, we move on to the next sutra, which is 3.30, which also covers a Sanyama, the next Sanyama, which is the 14th one. And the sutra is kaṇṭhakūpe kṣutpipāsānivṛttiḥ. So kaṇṭhakūpe, that is the region at the pit of the throat. Vyasa will tell us in detail exactly which area it is. So the term kaṇṭhakūpe refers to the region on which the Sanyama is to happen. So kaṇṭhakūpe Sanyamat is how it is to be read. So kaṇṭhakūpe, what happens? That is the Siddhi. And that is covered by the term kṣutpipāsānivṛttiḥ. Kṣut refers to hunger. Pipāsa refers to thirst. Pātumichha, pipāsa. So the desire to quench the thirst is pipāsa. Nivṛttiḥ, so freedom from that. The freedom from hunger and thirst is the Siddhi, so-called the fruit which is arising from sort of an otherworldly or sort of a supernatural result from the Sanyama, is freedom from thirst and hunger, which of course is of paramount importance to a yogi who is looking for an extended duration of dhyana and samadhi and so on. So now we move on to the Bhasia of the Sutra kaṇṭhakūpe kṣutpipāsānivṛttiḥ. So Vyasa explains, Jivvāyāha adhastāt tantuhu. So Jivva means the tongue. Jivvāyāha adhastāt means below the tongue, below the root of the tongue. There is a tantu. Tantu refers to the cords, the sort of the vocal cords. Tatodhasthat kaṇṭhah. Below that is the neck and throat region, kaṇṭha region. Further below, tatodhasthat kūpaha. Kūpaha refers to sort of a cavity. So that is elaborated elsewhere as urasparyantam kūpākāra chidram. So there is a cavity up to the uras. Uras refers to the chest region. So below the throat, there is this cavity-like shape between the collarbone, so to speak. So that is tatodhasthat kūpaha. Tatra sanyamat. If that is the region of the Sanyama, tatra sanyamat. Kṣutpipāsāna bādhete. So kṣutpipāse. So that is the thirst and hunger and thirst. Kṣutpipāse. Na bādhete. Those two don't disturb. the yogi. So we read in the Puranas, etc., yogis undergoing penance for years together. Somewhere it is said hundreds of years, thousands of years, etc. So the day-to-day tendencies of hunger, thirst, etc., is even in, let's say, a yogi who wants to undergo the dhyana samadhi process and tapas for several hours, day-to-day tendencies can be a problem. So it is recommended, or it is suggested, that there is the sanyama. And Vibhuti-pada is all about the various sanyamas and the jnana arising from it, or the siddhi arising from it, etc. So the kaṇṭhakūpe sanyamas, he develops the ability to be free from the problems of hunger and thirst for as long as the yogi wants. So therefore, the whole trouble of the sharirika badha, of which the greatest often is just hunger and thirst, that can be gotten rid of. So again, another text will sort of elaborate. It says, Kūpaha gartākara pradeshaha. It is a cavity, sort of circular cavity. Prānādehe yat samsparshat kṣutpipāsādayah pradurbavanti tasmin krita sanyamasya yoginah kṣutpipāsādayoho nivartante. It says this is the region where prana, etc., which keep the day-to-day bodily functioning going on. It is the samsparsha, it is the sort of the interaction of the prana in this region with this region that brings in the hunger, thirst, and the biological interactions and processes, or the internal chemical processes that will lead to hunger and thirst. That comes from the pranādayah, the prana, apana, vyana, etc., their activities, primarily in this region, the gartākara pradesha, the kaṇṭhakūpe region, that leads to hunger and thirst. And therefore, it says, it is the tasmin krita sanyamasya yoginah, yogi who was performed sanyama there, or who has attained sanyama there, for him, he can prevent or manage this kind of activity of the prana and the interaction in this region. And therefore, the kṣutpipāsādayaha pradurbhavanti, gives rise to hunger and thirst that the yogi can prevent, and therefore attain freedom from the basic needs of hunger and thirst. So that is essentially this particular sutra and the Bhasia for Sutra 3.30.
So, kaṇṭhakūpe kṣutpipāsānivṛttiḥ brings us to a location in our embodiment, which is the base of the throat. And it also tells us about something about esoteric anatomy and esoteric physiology. The kaṇṭhakūpa, the throat region, is so important with reference to yogic pursuit particularly, because you are aware that the samadhi is an aspect of yoga which doesn't last for a second or two or minute or two or hour or two. If you recall the table that we read out to you while dealing with the Samadhi Sutra, so it lasts for enormous length of time. And then obviously what would be obstructing such duration of a yogic state of samadhi would be thirst and hunger. And therefore thirst and hunger become so important to be tamed. And therefore one should understand the importance of this location in process of essential yoga, a finality of yoga, which is samadhi. Because unless the thirst and hunger are under control or are well managed, there is no chance, despite any qualification for samadhi, one is able to going for samadhi or getting samadhi. Because one may be qualified but not empowered. Now, why somebody is not empowered? Because of the natural call of hunger and thirst. Because you cannot impulse of hunger and thirst for days together, weeks together, months together, years together. And therefore, you can understand how the samadhi can become possibility and probability only when this major location of the body is handled, managed, tackled, etc. And that is the base of the throat. Then another point to be noted here, that this is the region where, according to exoteric anatomy and physiology, it is the place where thyroid glands are situated. And the thyroid glands work on metabolic rate. And the metabolic rate would also decide the impulse of thirst and hunger. And with reference to thyroid glands, we have certain diseases that we have heard about where the disease is related to metabolic rate. There is hyperthyroid condition and hypothyroid condition as diseases. So, in hypothyroid condition, the metabolic rate goes down. In hyperthyroid condition, the metabolic rate goes up. And when the metabolic rate is up, the wear and tear of the biological aspect of our embodiment is prone to, is going to suffer because of the high wear and tear rate. So, this location is even otherwise very important. And we know that the windpipe and the food pipe goes through that location. And again, that throat becomes very important location. And that's why we have the expression called stranglehold, which keeps the life at stake. So the life force is greatly dependent upon the throat region in exoteric aspects, and as I just now said about the thyroids. Now, hypothyroid is a disease in biological and corporeal status of embodiment. But if there has to be samadhi, something needs to be done to metabolic rate. And there is a concept of hibernation in the physiology of human beings, and yogis need hibernation in physiology of the embodiment. Otherwise, the practices or actualizations of samadhi, etc., would not be a probability despite qualification. So, the metabolic rate has to be handled positively in samadhi or dharana, dhyan, samadhi practices. And of course, the locus of that is in the throat region, as exoteric anatomy speaks about thyroid glands, parathyroid glands, which are situated in the throat region. So yogi certainly handles the metabolic rate for samadhi to be in place. Now this can be understood by little thought process and little analysis. Without handling the metabolic rate, it won't be possible to be in samadhi, which is something of a very long duration of time. And the hunger and thirst are the ones who come and impede or detonate a process such as dharana, dhyan, samadhi. So it scores important. Another point to be noted that this is a region in Shat Chakras. The region is Vishuddhi Chakra. Vishuddhi, very nomenclature suggests purification. And in exalted, purified state, One is Atma Swarupa. It is, we are Sharira Swarupa or Manasa Swarupa because of our impurities. But in absolutely purified state, which is possible to a yogi, the yogi is said to be in Atma Swarupa. And one of the important aspects of Atma Swarupa is that there is no thirst and hunger. So it is because of the pranic management. In one of the compositions of Srimad Adi Shankaracharya called Atma Shataka, there is a line which says, Na me pranaha kṣutpipāsānivṛttiḥ. I am not prana, and therefore how will I get thirst and hunger? So the thirst and hunger is related to prana. It is because of prana that we have impulses of thirst and hunger. And now if the impulse for thirst and hunger has to be hibernated and under control, something has to be done on the Vishuddhi Chakra. So Vishuddhi Chakra Kriya works on it. And secondly, Vishuddhi Chakra also plays an important role to give purified state possible to yogi, whereby he will be in Atma Swarupa. When he is in Atma Swarupa, there will be no call of thirst and hunger, because thirst and hunger are not to Atma, not to Purusha Tattva. It is a metaphysically transcendent principle and is not tormented, harassed, or impacted by impulses such as thirst and hunger. So this location has a very important place in the yoga technology and engineering aspects of consciousness for samadhi. And Patanjali's Sutra here testifies that by saying that at the kaṇṭhakūpe samyama by in the kaṇṭhakūpe region, there is kṣutpipāsānivṛttiḥ, and therefore one goes beyond the prana, and one can therefore be in Atma Swarupam, and being in Atma Swarupam, there won't be such kind of calls, harassments and chastisements and interruptions, because all our activities, however we are involved, they are interrupted by the impulse of thirst and hunger. However you might be dedicated in your endeavor, involved in your endeavor, the thirst and hunger are going to detonate your involvement or your engrossment. So that much the kṣutpipāsā is important, and we can understand how kṣutpipāsānivṛttiḥ is important in samadhi, and how kṣutpipāsā is related to kaṇṭhakūpe, and how exoteric anatomy and physiology as well as esoteric anatomy and physiology have some endorsements coming for what is being postulated. And therefore this is a very important location in the practices of yoga. Could be asana, could be pranayam, could be japa, dhyana, etc. Now usually the cognizance is not taken of this region, but kaṇṭhakūpe is so important, and for you and me, for commoners and mortals, we know that thyroid, parathyroids are situated here, and they have certainly regulating kind of mechanism on our metabolic rate, and something needs to be done on metabolic rate. Hyperactive metabolism is not good for essential yoga, and hypoactive, not as a disease but as a condition, is important for yoga, for practices of japa, dhyana, dharana, samadhi. It becomes of great importance. So, little bit insight for esoteric anatomy and physiology can be had in this sutra, and which also is supported by exoteric anatomy and physiological concepts. Okay.
Yes. So the the kaṇṭhakūpe region is also one of the Shodasha Adharas, where the Kantha Adhara refers to this region. The Vishuddha Chakra was also just mentioned. And the process here still remains Sanyama. So often a modern reader will reduce that to some kind of management of thyroid, etc. But we have to, while taking cognition of the glands in that region, as seen from our, as was said, the exoteric process, we have to still understand from a Yoga Sutra point of view, so the process still remains Sanyama, which is the Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, and it is not any specific management of the glands or chemicals, etc. It may be happening as a side effect, but the process here is still the same, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, and this is still a Siddhi coming from there. And the chakras, they are not directly mentioned in the Yoga Sutra and the Bhasia text, but the chakras are further, you can say that they add further color, in the sense that in the region where the Sanyama is mentioned, the chakras bring in the Dhyeya Vastu, what is brought about by the Dhyana. And then the chakras reveal, the text dealing with chakras, they will reveal a very specific representation. A certain lotus with so many petals, with these letters of the Sanskrit alphabet. Then there will be a male deity, a female deity, a Shakti, etc. at each of these regions. So that is the process of dhyana, which often there will be a dhyeya vastu there, and the dhyeya is often very detailed and colorful, which we dealt with when we talked also about the term bhavanam, when we discussed vitarka badane pratipaksha bhavanam. So the dhyana process also is a process of revelation, constructive contemplation, etc., which then brings in the chakra angle. Whereas at this point, this text is dealing with that region and the specific process of sanyama in that region. Okay. Now moving to Sutra 3.31. It is in the same vein, and it brings in the 15th Sanyama. It says, kūrmanāḍyāṃ sthairyam. So, kūrmanāḍyāṃ sanyamat sthairyam. So, on Sanyama, on the Kūrmanāḍi. Now, the Bhasyakāra Vyasa will tell us what that refers to. But the Sutra says, in case of Sanyama, on the Kūrmanāḍi, the Siddhi, the result or the fruit, which is not, whenever we say Siddhi, it is a sort of a divine result of it. It has an aspect which is not, which is beyond what is known as the laukika cause and effect. It is not the regular physical cause and effect. When we say Siddhi, there is an aspect of divine or a magical sort of a result that is coming in. So that one here is sthairyam. Sthairyam is stability, sthirata. Okay. So now Vyasa says, Kūpāt adaha urasi kūrmākārā nādi. So below the Kūpa is something that we just discussed. Below that, urasi, uras means chest. So in the chest region, there is a nadi which is kūrmākārā. So specifically it is said, the nadi in question is of the shape of a kurma. Kurma is tortoise. So the nadi is laid out, is coiled, etc., so that it has the shape of a kurma. So there is a mention of another nadi with the name kurma. Here there is the akara of the kurma. Now tasyam krita sanyamaha. So when a yogi has performed or has attained sanyama, on this particular Kūrmākārā nadi, which is below the kaṇṭhakūpe in the chest region, sthira padam labhate. Now the sthira padam is a place, so to speak, or a state of solidity, stability, unshakableness. So that is what is attained. Then Vyasa says, Yatha sarpo godhaveti. So as an example, it says like a snake. Sarpa is a snake. Godha is this reptilian animal, which we read in history, where this lizard-like animal, it was even used to sort of during war. A rope used to be tied to this animal, given because of its stability and solidity, and using that as a hook, warriors could climb the face of the hill. So it is that a solid, stable animal, lizard-like, large reptilian animal. So sarpo godhava. In case of the snake, it is said that when it enters its hole in the ground and inserts the head inside, it suddenly becomes very still and stable, and however you try to pull it outside, it won't come out. It can hold firm. So that is the illustration being used both for the sarpa and the godha. Okay. So this is about the kurma kara nadi. Now there are other references to kurma in the sense that kurma as a tortoise, it says it can withdraw, because it can withdraw its heads and limbs. That is, the analogy is often taken to the yogi will withdraw his senses within and then become stable. So that analogy can also be brought in here. The kurma nadi, there is some discussion whether the kurma nadi and the kurma kara nadi referred to here are the same. So there is some discussion in the text, but Vyasa clearly says that this is the kurma kara nadi. There is a certain nadi in the shape of the tortoise in the chest region, and that is where the sanyama here is proposed for complete sthairyam. There is also a discussion whether this sthairyam is just bodily sthairyam, or is it the sthairyam of the mind and the chitta. And then often that discussion will take that it is primarily the bodily sthairyam that then leads on, because once the bodily activity ceases, then the pranic activity also ceases, because it doesn't have to power the bodily activity anymore, and then that will lead to the sthairyam in a sort of a sequence in the mental processes and the chitta. So that is how, as discussed in the previous sutra also, there are certain areas, just like the adharas that was mentioned earlier, and it is very significant. There are certain areas within the embodiment, whether it is the big toe, ankle, etc., or the kaṇṭhakūpe, the specific nadi in the chest region, etc., they have various kinds of significance. And here in the Vibhuti Pada, the sanyama is the point of focus in order to inform the yogi who has attained skill and mastery in the Ashtangas, and then wishes to know, as we had seen, there is a bubhutsa. The yogi has a wish to know as to, okay, now that the yogi is proficient in sanyama, what are the various kinds of sanyamas suggested and the siddhis attainable? And the Vibhuti Pada is listing them. And sthairyam, we have seen this word in multiple places, primarily in the sthirasukamasanam. So that sthairyam is key. So the unshakableness and the sthairyam here has been associated with the sanyama in the kurma nadi, which is said to be in the urus. And to bring in the nature of sthairyam, Vyasa has given the analogy of the sarpa, the snake, and the godha, the reptilian animal that I just mentioned. Also, of course, this region, from a chakra point of view, the anahata chakra is said to be there in the chest region, in the hridaya desha. We are also going to see another sutra referring to the hridaya desha in general. So this region also has huge significance, even in the Upanishads, the Chandogya Upanishads, that there is the mention of Dahara, Akasha, etc., that we'll see later. Here it is slightly more in the body, the Harakasha, etc., takes us straight to the Paramatma, Vasudeva, etc., residing within. So this particular Sanyama is with respect to a Nadi in the chest region, which is the Kurmakara Nadi, and brings in this very important Siddhi of sthairyam, unshakableness, unshakingness, which begins with the body, then goes further to the pranic system and the chitta, etc. So that's about Sutra 3.31.
So another aspect of esoteric anatomy physiology, kūrmanāḍyāṃ sthairyam, kūrmanāḍī. And this is again situated right under what we just now discussed, kaṇṭhakūpe. Therefore, it is in the chest region. And it is for sthairyam. And then sthairyam is something that is so centric aspect in all practices of yoga. Prior to samadhi and very samadhi, the sthairyam is so important. And it is kūrmakara nadi, as you just now heard. Now, kūrmakara nadi, that means something to do with the tortoise. And the tortoise is known for its unique ability, and that's why it's a great symbol. Kūrma is a great symbol in spiritual practices. That when it is able to draw all its senses under its shell, and then it can go into hibernation. So the Kūrma is ideal biological entity for those who are in pursuit of yoga and any aspect of spirituality. That's why in all temples, at the gate of it, or between the entry and between the sanctum sanctorum, there is always a tortoise, which signifies that one should draw the senses in. And drawing the senses inwards is one of the most important factors for steadiness in our mind. Because studying the mind is the greatest proposal with the greatest difficulty. And the tortoise is a great symbol to be inculcating the nature of studying the senses. And therefore, the Kūrmakara nadi, the reference to Kūrma, is so significant here, which also has aspect of pratyahar that it is suggesting, and the concept of drawing the senses inwards. And Vyasa makes it further clear by mentioning the two animals such as sarpa and godha, as just now you heard, the reptiles. Now, reptiles have this unique ability and capacity to go into hibernation. Alligators, crocodiles, snakes, they go into hibernation. And that hibernation is something by lowering the metabolic rate. If you look at the physiological dimension of it, not lowering the metabolic rate, hibernation is beyond imagination. So, we refer to hibernation in the previous sutra for samadhi and its actualization. And the samyama does it. Samyama also a great bounty to have great ability for hibernation. And here again, Vyasa quotes sarpa, and that reptile which you heard from Srineet, which is known for its steadiness. And the steadiness is a very signature condition of yoga. Its steadiness everywhere, right from gross body to consciousness plane. The steadiness is so important. It's very centric to very idea of yoga. And therefore, this kūrmanāḍi, which is kūrmanāḍi, and then now kūrmakara nadi, as Vyasa clarifies, and the location which is right below the throat between the Uro Pradesha and the Kantha. So there lies this Kurmakara Nadi. So again, how we are considering this concept of hibernation needed, steadiness needed, firmity needed, freedom from thirst and hunger needed for higher yogic pursuits. And therefore, there is another reference to esoteric anatomy, whereby something that is improbable to even imagine is possible because of esoteric aspects in it. And this is Kurmakara Nadi by Samya there. The Sthirapadam of the caliber that a Samadhi qualified yogi has is being mentioned. So, once again, we are brought face to face with esoteric anatomy physiology, which yoga often speaks about. Okay.
So this is the 15th of the Sanyamas. So the next sutra is 3.32. Once again, it continues by referring to different bodily regions. It is saying, mūrdhajyotiṣi siddhadarśanam. So to complete it, it would be mūrdhajyotiṣi sanyamat siddhadarśanam. Now one thing I think I should clarify, because we have been pointing out that certain things like freedom from hunger and thirst, etc., are important for samadhi. Whereas that siddhi itself is coming from samadhi because it is from sanyama. So sanyama already includes samadhi by being dharana, dhyana, samadhi combination. So to understand this, we have to also understand that there are several samadhis corresponding to several dhyaya vastus. And there is also a gradation. And we have looked at that in the previous sutra, where we had seen yogat, yogo, pravartate, etc. So the next samadhi is suggested automatically, it was said, when the previous stage is reached. And then, when a certain stage is reached, yogi realizes which is the next, and he doesn't have to cover all the stages below that. So, as we know, there is a gradation, and therefore, even though some may say that Sanyama already includes Samadhi, then why do you say that this is important for Samadhi? And the answer to that is, there is a whole series of Samadhi, whole variety of Samadhi with different grades and different levels, pertaining to what is the Alambanam, and what is the Jnanam arising from that, and what is the Siddhi. And therefore, each of these leads to certain Siddhis, certain Samskaras, certain abilities in the yogi, which then sort of propel the yogi and prop up the yogi to be able to hold the next set of samadhis that pertain to that particular yogi. So that is how this is to be understood with reference to this overall context and big picture. So with 3.32, which is mūrdhajyotiṣi siddhadarśanam. So, shirak kapale antaschidram prabhaswaram jyotihi. Which is in the certain region in the skull, there is a prabhaswaram jyotihi. There is a light, the shining light, so to speak, luminous area. So this has been referred to with different terms like Brahmarandra. So there is supposed to be it is like a chidra near the crown of the head. And through the dhyana process, or what is known as antarlakshyam, when we look within in the dharana dhyana process, that is said to be a luminous experience arising there. So that is the mūrdhajyotiṣi. So that is the mūrdhajyotiṣ. Now when sanyama happens or is attained there, tatra sanyamat, siddhanam yava prativyoh antaralacharinam darshanam. So what happens there? So here this is clearly a siddhi, a result, a divine result from this particular sanyama, which is siddhadarśanam. So siddhas, they are specific beings, celestial beings. It says deva yoni visheshanam. So laukikanam krite adrishyanam. So for a normal people like us, the siddhas are not visible, but they are the class of celestial beings who have attained um, a certain degree in the so-called spiritual path, in the adhyatmic path, that they are celestial beings who can travel, who will travel in, as I said, Dyava Prasubhyoho Antaralacharinaha. So they can go in the Antariksha region, the Prithvi region, the Swarga, etc. They can travel there. And the yogi then gets the ability to see them. Now obviously once the yogi is able to see a Siddha Purusha, who is full of knowledge, because that is the jnana, the tapas that has led them to that position, then the yogi can attain jnana from them. So that is why the siddhadarśanam can take the yogi to the next level, because now the yogi has access to people of higher caliber, celestials, who have the jnana that may not be otherwise available. So the Divya Purushas, the divine beings, now become accessible to the yogi through the Sanyama on this particular region, which is the mūrdhajyotiṣi, also referred to as Brahmarandra, etc. Once again, this is a very significant region in terms of the Adhara, also in terms of chakra. There is a specific chakra, of course, that is associated here in the top, so Sahasrara chakra, etc., that comes here. There are deities mentioned where the dhyana is prescribed. Often there is certain deities, certain Sanskrit varnas, bija mantras, etc. There is also the loka, like the bhuloka, bhuvar loka, associated in the context of a human body. So the parapara loka is associated at this particular region. So from various points of view and various practices that have so there are various approaches for the human being to sort of approach divinity, and this particular region has significance in all of them. And then similarly here from the Yoga Sutra text, it says the Sanyama is sort of the yogic, purely yogic process, and it is said that the Sanyama on this region bestows this ability for access to the siddhas. This is also referred to as the Akasha Chakra in certain places. So that is the Sutra 3.32 of the Bhasia of Vyasa.
So mūrdhajyotiṣi, as you have heard, is the location described by Vyasa as Shirakapale Antachitram. Shirakapala, that's the location in the body, location in the human embodiment, and that is referred to as Brahmarandra. Brahmarandra is a hollow at the crown of the head. Why is this hollow at the crown of the head? Is that those who are going to get liberated, in their case, the life passes from this hollow in the Shirsha Kapala Pradesha, or that what is called as Brahmarandra. Usually life passes through lower gates for mortals and other gates, Navadvara, Puri. There are 9 gates to this embodiment, as you have heard about the 9 gates. Usually life passes through these gates for the mortals who are going to be rotating in the 8.4 million Shiva yonis. But one who is going to get liberated, the life escapes. It darts into the Brahmaloka from the Brahmarandra, which is in the location that is spoken of in this sutra. Now these siddhas are celestial beings or liberated beings, and they move between Java, Prithvi, as Vyasa makes it clear here. So they are in this space, moving in the space, and of course they are invisible to you. They become visible to yogis because of this samyama. And just vision of these great people, it means enormous endowment, enormous grace, enormous bounty. Just the darshanam of a siddha purusha is not just a vision for one who has the vision of the siddha purusha. It is great endowment, it's a great blessing, it's a great grace. So yogi received the grace for his remainder of the journey in the path of yoga, which would be terminating in kaivalya. And therefore siddhadarshana has great significance, that these are liberated or celestial beings who are superhuman beings, and their sight or their vision of them or the grace of them is so important, and yogi gets it by samyama in the mūrdhajyotiṣi. There is something prabhaswaram, something luminous kind of light. Luminosity is there, and there the samyama happens. On that light, the samyama happens. And then this is the siddhi, that there is siddhadarśanam. No words are sufficient to describe what is siddhadarśanam. It is not just seeing someone. We say, I saw this person, I saw that person. With what avail? But siddhadarśanam is something enormous, and it is beyond words to explain and express, because they have a lot of endowments for yogis, and so yogis' path further towards kaivalya is smoothened and also becomes attainable. So siddha darshana is so important in yogic process, and that is by the samyama. Okay.
Yes. And in the Bhagavad Gita also it is said, which is quite related to the Yoga Sutra text, because Krishna says, Siddhanam Kapilo Munihi. So among the Siddhas, I am the Kapila Muni. And Kapila Muni, as we know, is there's a whole Sankhya Shastra is attributed to Kapila, and Yoga and Sankhya go together. So that is one related aspect. Also the Siddhas also are in celestial beings. They are also in search of truth and mukti, like it is said again in the Bhagavad Gita. It says, Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschit yatati siddhaye yatatam api siddhanam kaschit man vetti tattvataha. So there is the adhyatmic ladder, is a long one. So even the siddhas, it says, no, siddha may refer to a human yogi or a celestial being, but even among them, says Krishna is the ultimate being, Paramatma, or Bhagavan in the Bhagavad Gita. It says even among the siddhas who are constantly in the adhyatmic practice, only some will actually know me completely or truly. It says. Okay. Now the next sutra is slightly different, 3.33, because so far there was a certain sanyama prescribed and then the siddhi mentioned. Now we'll tell you why the next one is slightly different. It says, so 3.33, it says prātibhādvā sarvam. So from the pratibha means arising from pratibha. That which arises from pratibha is pratibha. And it says prātibhādvā sarvam. Or from pratibham, you attain everything, or you get to know everything. All the jnanas, everything that is being prescribed so far, all of that is available in an alternative way, it says, from the pratibham. So now let's look at what this means by looking at Vyasa's Bhasia. And therefore, so far I've been saying, this is the 15th Sanyama, this is the 16th Sanyama. But 3.33 is not giving a 17th Sanyama. It is not prescribing a specific Sanyama. Now what it says is prātibhādvā sarvam. Va means or. So or from pratibha, everything can be attained, everything can be known. That has been described so far. So pratibham nama tarakam, says Vyasa. Tarakam is also a significant term in Adhyatma. Tarayati dukkham agnan janan tarakam is that is how it is elaborated in the Yoga Vartika. So which takes one across this, the problems of samsara, the state of samsara, the bhoga, etc. One that saves someone from that, one that carries someone across it. That is tarakam. So Vyasa says, pratibham nama tarakam. This pratibha jnanam is a taraka jnana. It takes one across this whole ocean of samsara. So what is this pratibham? Vyasa says, tad vivekajasya jnanasya purva rupam. So there is something called vivekaja jnanam, which of course we have talked about. We also talked about viveka khyati, prasankhyanam, etc. So viveka, as we know, is this ultimate discriminative knowledge. You talked about sattva purusha anyata khyati, or being able to understand the difference between the ultimate entity, the purusha, and then the various manifestations of prakriti, including the shuddha sattva, the chitta in its purest form, the various other manifestations. So getting to know or having a realization of this distinction of things that may seem very similar, because this is again something that we had seen in detail earlier, where the purified chitta, completely pure chitta, and the purusha, they appear almost identical, but they're completely different, and we have seen why they are same, why they are different, etc. So the viveka that brings in this discriminative understanding, realization between them, is the viveka jnanam, the jnanam, the realization arising from this viveka. Now that, of that vivekajasya jnanasya, this is a purva rupam. Now the pratibham jnanam is just one stage prior to that. That is pratibham jnanam. And here it is said that from that jnana, prātibhādvā sarvam, all of this can be understood. So this also sort of relates to this jnana vijnana term. The jnanam is a final understanding of the nitya reality of adhyatma, something that is permanent, the purusha, etc. But there is a vijnanam, there is the understanding of everything else that may change with time, has its own time and place, has its own level of purity, etc. So this pratibham jnanam gives an understanding of everything. That is why it says prātibhādvā sarvam, all the siddhis. What is this pratibham? It is just one stage prior to the vivekaja jnana. Now Vyasa again helps us with an analogy. He says, yathodaye prabha bhaskarasya. So during the sunrise, which is known as udaya. So before the suryodaya, the sunrise, bhaskara means surya. So before the sunrise, there is a glow that comes first in the sky. So similarly, before the vivekaja jnanam, there is this glow, or this is the jnanam which is one stage earlier. That is the pratibham jnanam. So beautiful analogy by Vyasa to help us understand what is this pratibham jnanam. Now, tena va sarvameva janati yogi pratibhasya jnanasya utpattau iti. So when this jnanam arises, the pratibham jnanam, which is a stage before the vivekajam jnanam, then that is one way where everything can be, all the jnana is attained by the yogi or is available to the yogi. So vivekajasya jnanasya vakshamanasya sarvajnasya purvalingam. So vivekaja jnanam is going to be described further. But just before that, the pratibham jnanam has this great siddhi where the sarvameva janati, all these things that have been described so far, etc., is available to the yogi. Again it is said, Pratibha uhaha tadbhavam pratibam prasankhyan hetu sanyamavato hi tat prakarsham prasankyanodaya purvalingam yat uhajam jnanam tena sarvam vijanati yogi. So once again, one level before the Vivekaja Jnanam, one stage before the Prasankhyanam, the yogi gets to know everything. So here, Patanjali and Vyasa are also telling us that while several individual Sanyamas have been described so far with the Siddhis, if a yogi has that level of Adhyatmic maturity, so to say, or the wisdom, where he is not attempting all these Sanyamas, etc., he is going for the ultimate, the Vivekaja Jnanam. It is not as though all the Siddhis are unavailable just because all the individual Sanyamas were not attempted, were not done, were not attained. Because before the Vivekaja Jnanam, there is this Pratibham Jnanam where Sarvameva Janati Yogi. So the yogi full of vairagya, full of wisdom and maturity, who has his eyes set purely on Vivekaja Jnanam, will still undergo a stage of Pratibham Jnanam where all the siddhis, all the knowledge, all the realization will automatically come to him. And that is the stage of the Pratibham Jnanam. And this Sutra 3.33, rather than prescribing a specific Sanyama, is making it very clear that the path of attempting straight towards Vivekajam Jnanam also invariably will lead to all the knowledge that are available through different sanyamas and different siddhis. So even again, we talked about various levels of sanyama. So it is not as though if something is not attempted, it will be missed. All of that is available, because if the yogi is going to eventually reach Vivekajam Jnanam, that yogi is going to attain all these other Jnanam and Siddhi just prior to that. And that is what the Sutra 3.33, prātibhādvā sarvam, says along with the Bhasia.
So worth taking note here that this is not a samyama, as Srineet clarified it right in the beginning. So this is pratibha jnanam. Pratibha jnana, the jnana that comes out of pratibha. What is pratibha? Pratibha is rendered as intuition, but it's not intuition, it is intuition by mysterious process of samadhi and yoga. It is not the intuition that is referred to in common man's parlance. Then this is something like twilight before sunrise. I just now heard from Srineet, he described it. This is like samadhi is for viveka, it's a viveka sadhana. It is for viveka khyati, viveka jnanam, satya purushan takyati, or buddhi purusha khyati. So this discrimination is the goal of yoga. And Ashtanga Sutra 2.28 tells you about that. Gnani diptihi aviveka khyate. So the yogic pursuit is for viveka khyati. Now in that process of getting viveka khyati, which is the full bloom sun of wisdom, that's the acme condition of Jnana Surya, the sun of wisdom, sun of knowledge. But then before the sunrise, there is twilight. And this is pratibha that yogi gets in samadhi process. It is not common man's cup of tea that otherwise each one of us perhaps claim we have intuitions. But this is not intuition, this is intuition, which comes by samadhi process. And by this, prātibhādvā sarvam, all the exalted knowledge that was spoken about as a siddhi out of samyama, all that is possible by that prabha of Usha Prabha before the dawn of Viveka Khyati. And that would mean that all the samyamas so far mentioned are potentially there for a yogi who has attained viveka khyati, because the sunrise is not without twilight. So viveka khyati is not without prātibhādvā. And that prātibhādvā, he says, it is of the nature of all knowledge, complete knowledge, prātibhādvā sarvam. Okay.
Okay. We'll stop here for today. Let us recite the slokas on Guruji and stop for today. Vaiඥānikam pravakritva āsaneshu kalavidam yogābhyāse ca tattvajñam vandeham sundaram gulam yogavruksho hi lokesmin yat preranena varditah yogācārya guro tubhyam sundarāya namo namaha. Thank you.
Namaskar, all of you.